Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is NopNapNarp, and I figured I'd start this review with a quick story. After completing Spider-Man's opening mission, I decided to web swing around New York in search of the Empire State Building. One of my favorite things to do in 2004's Spider-Man 2 was to climb to the top of New York's tallest building and check out the view. I knew that when Spider-Man 2018 released, one of the first things that I had to do was climb that same building, and so that's what I did. I admired an absolutely gorgeous view of the city as I looked for familiar landmarks, and right as I was about to jump off of the massive skyscraper, symbolically representing my jump into this new adventure with the web slinger, I saw it. Avengers Tower. It put a huge smile on my face. I quickly web-slinged over to the giant tower and perched upon it and was soon awarded a trophy for doing so. That put an even bigger smile on my face. And I knew right then that this game would not disappoint me. And I was right. And that puts the biggest smile on my face. So welcome everyone to my review for Insomniac's latest work, Marvel's Spider-Man. This review will contain story spoilers, so if you haven't finished playing it or haven't even started it yet but plan to, I suggest that you come back later. Now, I avoided most of the media coverage of Spider-Man during both the pre-release and post-release time period in order to draw my own conclusions once I got my hands on the game. And going in, I knew that the one central gameplay mechanic that the developers had to get right for the game to be a success was the feeling associated with web slinging. 2004's Spider-Man 2 is widely accepted as the best Spider-Man game, and a large reason for that is because the game made you feel like you were actually Spider-Man, and that was mostly due to how excellent traversal felt. For this 2018 game to live up to those lofty levels, the web slinging had to at least match, if not exceed, that game's efforts. So that's where we need to start this review, by talking about movement and traversal in the game. And as you can probably tell by the title of this video, developer Insomniac absolutely nailed it. I can safely say that the web-slinging mechanic in this game exceeds that of 2004's Spider-Man 2, a feat that has not been accomplished in any Spider-Man game since. And the game knows it, as the very first thing you do controlling Spider-Man is web swing. It's like the developer said, yeah, we know what you want, and we delivered, no bullshit, here's what you want from the very start of the game. The webs shoot quickly out of Spider-Man's wrists with fluid animations and that iconic Spider-Man web sound. The feeling of building up momentum with each swing unlocks a fantastic feeling within you, as the whole landmass of Manhattan can now be traversed in just a few minutes. The game takes extra steps to make sure the swinging is as fluid as possible, while also ensuring it stays somewhat believable by making sure that there has to be something tall enough for your webs to latch onto. There are also tons of launch points dotting the city skyline that Spider-Man can use to perform a point launch, which sends him hurtling forward and ready to continue his swinging motion onto his next mission. Even if you swing into a building, Spider-Man can sprint straight up it and use this point launch system to get him moving quickly again. The emphasis on fast and fluid movements makes traversal one of the most enjoyable things to do in this game. In fact, if there wasn't a trophy for fast traveling 5 times, I don't think I ever would have even used that system in the 25 hours it took me to complete the entire game. I talked about this in a video on Horizon Zero Dawn, but when an open world game makes you never want to use the fast travel system, the mobility mechanics, and the world and level design needs to be commended. As a fan of Spider-Man, you owe it to yourself to play this game for the sheer fun that results from swinging around as New York's greatest hero. The web slinging elevates every other component of the game in some way. The visuals are enhanced by how quickly you can ascend to the top of huge skyscrapers to admire the beautiful views. The gameplay is made better by your freedom to swing quickly all over the battlefield, leaving your opponents searching for you as you swoop in to pick one of them off. And the next story mission is never too far away because of how fast you can get around the city naturally. But there's more to this game than just splendidly swinging around the city, so let's talk about that. Spider-Man is by no means the greatest looking game I've ever played, but that's not to say that the game is ugly or anything. I think the game's graphics shine most when Spider-Man is perched on the top of a tall building looking over his playground. The lighting effects always seemed believable to me no matter what the weather was, but I'd say the game looks best during the daytime with sunny weather. Spider-Man always pops out against the browns, grays, and tans of the buildings, and this allows the player to never lose their positional awareness. Speaking of buildings, one of the side missions in this game is to photograph landmarks, and it put a smile on my face to see the blending of actual structures of New York with tons of comic book and MCU references. My favorite had to be finding the Sanctum Sanctorum that Doctor Strange inhabits. Elements like this really help to inform the world. Not to mention that I love the other little details as well, like how some of the skyscrapers have apartments in the windows that you can actually look in and see, and how you can also find Uncle Ben's grave and pay your respects. Oh, I also love how the street lamps brighten up the atmosphere during the nighttime. In terms of our main characters, character models vary a bit in my mind. I'd say Aunt May, Peter Parker, and Dr. Octavius have the best looking models, while characters like MJ, Miles Morales, and Norman Osborn looked a bit off at times, a little bit in that uncanny valley kind of region. Maybe that's just me though, but one thing that always did look great are the various Spider-Man suits you can unlock and wear. More on this later, but I mean, tell me this vintage comic Spider-Man suit doesn't look absolutely incredible as we gracefully move around in order to beat up some goons. It's goddamn beautiful. And you would think that all this swinging around may affect the game's frame rate, as different areas are having to be rendered quickly as Spider-Man approaches them, but I'm happy to say that this is never a factor. In fact, the game looks just as good while you're web-slinging around, as a little bit of a blur effect helps convey a sense of momentum, speed, and agility. Again, I think the strength of the web slinging enhances every component of this game, and this is just another example. Your incredible movement speed allows you to see the stagnant city in a new way, as a sprawling jungle gym to explore. In terms of music, the game didn't really wow me with any pieces, but it also didn't disappoint. I'd say the music that stands out to me most is when Spider-Man leaps from a building and starts web-slinging, as a heroic theme starts to play.
All units advised, a vehicle pursuit is in progress. Please converge on Tenderloin, over.
Your freedom in moving quickly, along with this musical theme, helps drive home the feeling that you actually are Spider-Man. Other than that, most of the music served as background noise to complement cutscenes. In terms of sound work, everything sounded believable for the most part. I especially love the sound of Peter's webs shooting out. It really gets a Spider-Man fan's Spidey sense going. Oh god, I hate myself for writing that. The only over-the-top bad thing I can think of is after completing this one mission, a bunch of people are standing around clapping, but it makes no clapping sound, and it's very cringy. Anyway, voice acting is solid as well. Peter Parker and Dr. Octavius sounded awesome to me.
You started without me.
The grant committee's director will be here soon. It's fine, Parker. I invented this equipment. I think I can handle it.
And everyone else's voice seemed to fit their character as well. Oh, and I also loved listening to J. Jonah Jameson's radio broadcast as he reacted to the events of the game while constantly bashing Spider-Man.
Let's dive right into the calls. Speak.
Okay, so not for nothing. You gotta give Spider-Man respect for taking down Wilson Fisk, right? I mean, one less mob boss is good for everyone.
Is that right? Tell me, are you a police officer? Prosecutor? Maybe an award-winning reporter with decades on the job like me?
No, I'm a plumber.
Oh, good. Then fix my toilet and shut up! Let me explain something to you about crime boss. As soon as one goes down, every punk with a gun, a tracksuit, and a drawer full of gold chains decides he's the next godfather. We're gonna have a gang war in the streets, but does that whip-headed moron give a damn? Of course not. He got on TV. That's what counts.
No bad performances in my opinion when it comes to voice acting. I guess I should also mention that I did run into just a few bugs, but none of them were very aggravating. The most notable would be that at one point a Sable agent glitched into the side of a building and I couldn't take him down, which means I couldn't progress. But luckily for me, that was just one of the random crimes that you can encounter and complete, so I didn't really lose much progress as I swung away. Overall, I found the presentation of this game to be exactly what you'd expect from a big budget game. Everything was above average in visuals, especially considering how many buildings and other things are being rendered on the screen at one time. It did not disappoint me in the slightest, and most of the components I talked about enhanced the game's world and player experience. So I've already raved on and on about how movement and web slinging is handled in this game, so let's look at how it affects other components of the game, primarily combat and how the game's content is organized and accessed. Marvel's Spider-Man is an open-world game and features many of the usual suspects you'd expect in such a game: main missions, side missions, miscellaneous quests, and collectibles. Almost all of these mission types involve combat of some sort. I have 3 major complaints about this game, and the first would be this: it simply isn't very original. The gameplay is an obvious marrying of the combat in the Batman Arkham series with the structure of 2004's Spider-Man 2. Very little about this game is original to its core. Of my 3 biggest complaints, this is perhaps the one that I feel the least strongly about, as the 2 components being blended together here are amazing and the results are just as good. The gameplay, mechanics, and structure may feel very familiar, but that doesn't necessarily make them bad. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. When it comes down to it, I guess I just wish I would have experienced some more tweaks to the Arkham-style combat to elevate it to the next level. I was looking for an evolution to this combat style, but instead, reactive combat is ripped straight out of the Arkham series and adapted slightly to meet Spider-Man's skill set. However, that being said, I do believe that this combat style fits Spider-Man even better than Batman. Your Arkham-style melee and projectile web attacks feel like a natural fit for Spider-Man, and the combat you'd expect him to engage in, and your ability to counterattack is explained away by Spider-Man's spider senses. You see what I mean? It makes more sense for an agile, spider-like hero to be moving and engaging in combat in this manner, rather than a rigid middle-aged man decked out in heavy armor and gadgets. It just fits Spider-Man better, especially how great the finishing moves look. Their animations are so clean. This results in an unoriginal copy of Arkham's combat, but also a more enjoyable experience simply due to Spider-Man's perceived skill set and ability. As you progress through the story, new enemy types are introduced for Spider-Man to contend with, which again is nothing new to the Arkham combat style. You have your basic enemy, your enemy with a shield, your enemy with a melee weapon, your enemy with a gun, your enemy with explosives, and of course that bullshit enemy that magically blocks and dodges every gadget you throw at him and can only be counterattacked. Seriously, I hate these only can be countered enemy types. They break the immersion for me. You're telling me that some random street thug with whips can block almost any move thrown at him by a super powered man with spider-like abilities and super strength? Yeah, I'm not buying that. As the game progresses, combat encounters are made tougher with the introduction of prison escapees and trained Sable guards, who have more health, do more damage, and have additional help. In fact, the game's third act suffers a bit from this in my opinion. Sure, the game should become more challenging as it progresses, but some of these later encounters with Sable agents are overly brutal even on the normal difficulty. You can have 5 enemies and a turret shooting at you at one time, and your counter button can't react to all of them at one time. It's a bit much, and if you couldn't tell, I hated interacting with Sable soldiers. I'd say the enjoyment of combat encounters with basic enemies peaks in about the second act. Luckily for me, this game has RPG elements as well that allows you to unlock more abilities for our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man as the game progresses. You can unlock various skills, most of which are combat related, as well as new gadgets that can turn the tide of battle. I particularly liked using the spider drone and web bombs. The introduction of these gadgets allows you to customize your playstyle a bit, and I really appreciate that. As I mentioned earlier, you can also unlock various suits that Spider-Man can change at any time. Each suit is more than just a cosmetic though. as each one of them comes with a special super ability. And I'm so happy to report that the special ability is not locked to the suit. As soon as you unlock a new suit, you can equip its special ability onto any other suit, and thank God that they did this. Having to be locked into a suit you didn't like because the ability was so useful would have been a pain in the ass, and I'm so glad that the developers had the foresight to see that issue and make sure it never threatened gameplay. That being said, during the game's third act, I took so much damage in combat from the sheer amount being thrown at me at once that I had no choice but to constantly use the skill that increased and regenerated my health. That was a bit annoying, but at least I could equip the different suits that I wanted. Combat is involved in almost every mission in the game, but not all of them. Main missions normally involve a combination of gameplay and story, but some of the missions are just cutscenes that are used to progress the story. A lot of the missions use the combat that I just described, as well as some traversal elements. There are also a good number of times in which Peter's smarts are showed off as you complete circuit challenges and analyze chemicals in fairly easy puzzle challenges. They are finished quickly and don't overstay their welcome, unlike what I'm about to discuss next. The other main type of gameplay within main missions represents my second big criticism of the game. There are sections throughout the main story in which you take control of Mary Jane or Miles Morales. Yeah, like I said, there's gonna be spoilers, so keep that in mind. Anyway, these sections are built around stealthing your way around and collecting items, and oh my god, are they boring and go on for a bit too long. I understand the developers probably viewed this as a way to offer additional types of gameplay, but the problem is that these sections are not nearly as enjoyable as playing as Spider-Man. They slow the pace of the game down tremendously, and often I would try to get through them as quickly as possible in order to get back to playing as Spider-Man. They are also very contrived and basic and very video gamey, as every enemy within them reacts like an absolute moron and acts as an exploitable AI rather than an actual human. You can manipulate their movements with sound distractions. That's right, a highly trained guard will have to investigate a radio that is 3 feet away from him if it turns on.
Broken glass packet. 5x5 control. Area clear.
Come on. Ignore me. I'm invisible.
I mean, you can hide behind a box and throw 600 sound lures in a row, distracting the guard, and they can't figure out where it came from. You can be throwing it from the same spot over and over again, just chucking these lures, and the little sound will go off and they'll turn around and be like, huh? Oh, better check over there. Like, absolute morons. I also felt like these sections popped up 2 to 3 times too many, and I would have felt them more excusable if they had made less appearances. The only times that I enjoyed these sections were the first time you play as Miles at City Hall, and when you play as MJ in Grand Central Station. I liked the surprise of playing as Miles, and the MJ section was favorable because it allowed her and Spider-Man to team up at a time in the story in which they were fighting, and MJ wanted Peter to allow her to help more despite the danger. In other words, it married gameplay with story and allowed them to overcome that debate because they worked together and they both accepted that they need each other in order to complete the mission. The developers tried to do their best with these stealth sections by introducing a new mechanic into them every time you played one, but at the end of the day, they just don't come close to the fun that you have while playing as Spidey. More on the story later, but outside of these sections, Spider-Man's main missions were very fun and didn't ever get stale. Moving on, side missions were kinda on the short end, usually lasting about 10 to 15 minutes, and were normally centered on Spider-Man completing tasks that you'd expect from a friendly neighborhood kinda guy. You save some college kids from mind control, stop a Spider-Man clone from endangering himself, and get some files back for the police. I wish some of these side missions had utilized Peter Parker more than Spider-Man, and allowed us to explore the relationships in his life. Instead, they are just go here, beat up these guys, go back here kind of missions. And if you wanted to stick to these kinda uninspired side missions, why not include some cameos to spice them up? I mean, the Wakandan Embassy, Avengers Tower, and Sanctum Sanctorum are all in the game. So why not let us share a few fights with other Avengers? That would have been badass, but no, just gotta punch some thugs for the 1 billionth time. It's good, but it's not great. The rest of the content is doled out in checklist style, and no one would be surprised if you thought this game was an Ubisoft game at any point. First, you have to use towers to unlock the whole map, then complete a set amount of each random mission type. These random mission types include stopping street crimes, taking down enemy bases in a system very similar to the Predator gameplay sections in the Arkham series, photographing landmarks, solving Black Cat's mystery, finding backpacks with collectibles, protecting Harry Osborn's research stations in traversal challenges, completing Taskmaster's hardcore challenges, and most importantly, catching pigeons.
Pigeon target acquired. Come on. It's a fast one.
Most of these tasks involve going somewhere and beating people up, but not all of them fit that mode. Research stations, Taskmaster challenges, and collecting pigeons usually revolve around challenging the player's ability to control Spider-Man's movements and were a nice change of pace from combat. Completing these miscellaneous tasks rewards the player with tokens that can be used to upgrade gadgets and unlock new suits, so they are well worth completing. A lot of these events would feel repetitive and mundane, but because they nailed the feeling of web slinging, these sections never bothered me, and I completed all of them joyfully. I also appreciate that my efforts were rewarded with a trophy each time I finished up a group of these challenges. There's a lot of content being offered here, and you're rewarded heavily for completing it, and the game should be applauded for that. 100%ing the game is meaningful and rewarding, and I love that. So that about wraps up my thoughts on the gameplay sections, so let's finish this bad boy up by talking about the story. So, story sections and reviews are always kinda difficult, because I don't want to recap the whole story, but I also don't want to leave you wondering what exactly even happened in the game, so I'll do my best. Again, I feel it's necessary to give you a big time spoiler warning, people. Seriously, you owe it to yourself to finish the game first. But anyway, here we go. Spider-Man's main story is truly enjoyable for fans of our webbed hero. A strong and gripping first and second acts are made to look average when the game's third act elevated the story to a level that I knew was coming but still love the hell out of. The game's story revolves around Peter Parker's relationships with those he cares for and how that conflicts with his responsibilities as Spider-Man, and that's exactly what any Spider-Man story needs to contain, the dissonance between being Peter and being Spider-Man. The game begins with you taking down Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, and this leads to a power vacuum in New York's control on crime. A new group of thugs, calling themselves the Demons, attempt to take control over the city, and Spider-Man hopes to find out their plan and stop them. All the while, he must maintain a tricky relationship with Mary Jane while keeping tabs on his Aunt May, who works at Feast, which is essentially a shelter to help the needy. Feast is ran by a man named Martin Lee, who has a mysterious past and is of course eventually revealed to be the leader of the Demons, and he wants to take revenge on the city and Mayor Norman Osborn, although his reasoning is not made clear until the end of the game. Spider-Man, along with his allies, attempt to learn more about the Demons and stop their crimes. The first act culminates with Lee and the Demons attacking City Hall and Mayor Osborn. Peter Parker is knocked out unconscious, and the game has you play as Miles Morales for a bit and hear his story. Now, up until this point, I had no gripes with the story, but here comes the first one. When the cutscene ends, you're done playing as Miles, Peter Parker was knocked out, that's all over, that ends, you're back to gameplay. Spider-Man knows that Martin Lee is behind the attack, even though he was knocked out during the whole event. There is no explanation for how Peter knows that Martin Lee is responsible. And even worse than that is that Peter isn't even surprised in the slightest that Martin Lee is the leader of the Demons.
I'm busy. What's up?
Have you started looking for Martin Lee yet?
No, I told you I can't start a manhunt based on a hunch from Spider-Man.
But I'm telling you, he's the guy.
Get me some solid evidence and we'll talk.
Solid evidence. Right.
This man has been a positive role model to Peter, has made a great name for himself in the city, and is Aunt May's boss, yet our hero shows no surprise or shock that Lee is the leader of the demons. He accepts it immediately without any time to wrestle with the reality of it. He just calls up his cop partner and is like, yep, we gotta find Martin Lee, he's the guy that did it. I'm stunned. I mean, it's like Peter watched the first gameplay trailer and knew Lee was the bad guy the whole time. I'm not sure how this made it through, but it took me out of the game completely. But as we moved into the second act, I started to accept it and move on past it. And we learned that Lee is after a bioweapon named Devil's Breath that can be used to cure any disease or as a weapon to decimate an entire population. Eventually, Spider-Man stops Lee's plan and the criminal is sent to the Raft, an island prison that houses all the city's most powerful criminals. During this whole first and second act, we view Lee as the major threat of the game. Meanwhile, though, we see hints that the Sinister Six will become a threat, a prospect that has many Spider-Man fans excited, and guess what? They do it. This whole time, we viewed Lee as the main threat. Meanwhile, the game has slowly but surely been transforming our friend, Dr. Otto Octavius, into Doc Ock. Just as Lee, aka Mr. Negative, is captured and sent to the Raft, Otto finishes his work and mends himself together with his iconic 4 mechanical arms, and the AI in the machine brings out the worst side of him. Using his new abilities, Doc Ock breaks out Mr. Negative along with Scorpion, Vulture, Electro, and Rhino from the Raft and forms the Sinister Six. If you thought the sounds of web slinging got your spidey senses going, this scene will bring you to the next level.
Dr. Octavius.
First and final warning. Stay out of our way.
In terms of gameplay though, I believe this third act suffers a bit by loading the streets of New York up with sable soldiers and thugs who are constantly shooting at you as you move through the city. It's really annoying. I mean, it's okay to be there, but tone it down a bit, it's too much. They also jam in 2 more stealth sections with MJ and Miles for padding, but despite all of this, the story of the Sinister Six keeps you going to complete the game's final act. Despite not being the most riveting gameplay sections, fighting the Sinister Six in pairs of 2 and sometimes as individuals was hands down my favorite experience of the game. I love the Martin Lee stuff in the first and second acts, but this final few missions brought the game up to a whole nother level in my eyes. Finally, we defeat the Sinister Six, stop Doc Ock, save Norman Osborn, and are left with a few gut-wrenching scenes as Otto begs for Peter's help, and even worse, the death of Aunt May.
All the people you've saved. I don't know what to do. Yes, you do.
She becomes sick when Doc Ock releases the Devil's Breath onto the people, and Peter has to make the choice to either give her the antidote or have it replicated to save everyone that's been affected. I'm not gonna lie, this scene had me choked up, and again, it symbolized Spider-Man's greatest struggle, juggling his life with the responsibilities of being a superhero. The game ends with some reveals and sets up the possibility of a sequel. I found the story to be very enjoyable, and it kept me engaged throughout, and very rarely did it have any issues with pacing. But you may recall that I said I have 3 major criticisms with the game, and we still have one more to discuss. And that is, of course, ludonarrative dissonance. This is a term that has been used a lot in recent years when discussing games, and it refers to the disconnect between gameplay and what is happening in the story. Many open-world games suffer from this issue, and Spider-Man is no exception. There are many times throughout the story in which it seems that the next main mission is time-sensitive or would demand Spider-Man's immediate attention. However, those next missions can be ignored for any side mission or random task. What's that? Martin Lee just bombed City Hall and could be hiding out at this warehouse? I should probably go check into that right away so he doesn't escape. Or I could go do some circuit projects in the lab for Dr. Octavius. That seems reasonable. Oh my god, Mary Jane is in trouble and may be killed by Sable soldiers. Better go catch some pigeons for Howard. It seems to be an inevitability for open world games to have this problem, but that doesn't mean I can't mention it as a criticism of the game's story. Perhaps this could have been solved by having main missions end with no other immediate threats, but that's probably easier said than done. Either way, it's one of those things I had to mention because it affects the game a ton. It's more excusable in a game like Grand Theft Auto, where our characters don't hold the same level of responsibility as a superhero, and so here I feel like it needs to be mentioned as a criticism. The breaks for other missions aside, the main story is still very enjoyable, and it kept me engaged and interested the whole time I played. It was also nice to know that the next main mission marker was always only a minute or two swing away because of how the game's traversal worked. I mean, have I mentioned how good the web slinging is yet? Oh yeah, I mean, it's basically all I've talked about, so I think it's time to end this review. Marvel's Spider-Man is an excellent adventure that puts you right into the action as a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Every aspect of this game is elevated by one central mechanic, web slinging, and it is executed so perfectly that traversal is the most enjoyable mechanic in the game. Your freedom of mobility in the world and in combat keeps you hooked and feeling as if you really are Spider-Man. This is a solid first outing of the superhero genre for Insomniac, and I would gladly play a sequel from this same studio. I'd hope that that sequel would include less stealth sections as other characters, and an evolution of the Arkham-style combat instead of a variation. With more ways to incorporate high-speed web slinging into combat, and better stories within side missions, the sequel to this game could be absolutely legendary. Speaking of future content, I couldn't fit this anywhere into the review, but we now know that there will be 3 DLCs coming out for the game over the next few months, and I can't help but to be disappointed in that regard. DLC is being released for the game just a month after its initial release, and it really irritates me and feels like a cash grab. This new DLC is called The City That Never Sleeps, and it could have been in the base game, but it sounds like it was ripped out to be sold to us later for more money. When I bought this game, the girl at the register told me about buying the Season Pass and described it as a Season Pass that finally makes sense, but I disagree wholeheartedly. If this content was ready now, it should have been on the disc at launch. To me, it just isn't very consumer friendly. For now, Arkham City remains my favorite superhero game, but Spider-Man 2018 is a close second. Despite finishing the game completely in only 25 hours, I feel like my experience with this game was jam-packed with lots of content, and very rarely did the quality of that content dip into average or below average categories. The game starts at a high point and mostly increases its wow factor as the game goes on. I highly encourage you to give this game a chance if you're a fan of Spider-Man or of the Batman Arkham games. I think you'll like it, as combat is fast, fluid, and most importantly, fun, while traversal around the world enriches all the mission styles that are presented to you within the game. J. Jonah Jameson may hate me for saying this, but Spider-Man 2018 is a slam dunk, and a wonderful starting point for what I hope will become a trilogy from Insomniac. The sequel has incredible potential, and based on this game, it's only a short reach away. Anyway, that does it for me. Please share your thoughts on Spider-Man in the comments below, and tell me if you agree or disagree with the arguments I've raised in this video. If it's your first time on the channel, check out some of my other work. So far this year, I've reviewed Kingdom Come Deliverance, Telltale's Batman the Enemy Within, and God of War. I also host a series called Psychology of Gaming that focuses on explaining how psychological principles are built into games and how games can affect us psychologically. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Consider subscribing for more. And as always, have a nice day and take care.